Andrew Amato was 4 years old when he disappeared on September 30th, 1978, from the wooded area near his home in Webster, Massachusetts. He lived with his family on Richard Avenue, a quiet residential street in a town known for its small neighborhoods and familiar surroundings. That Saturday morning began without any indication that it would become a defining moment in the life of the Amato family. Andrew left the house with his 7-year-old sister and his 6-year-old cousin, intending only to spend a short time exploring the nearby woods, as children often did in that era. The children walked along a narrow trail leading toward the area near Route 52, which was later known as Interstate 395, and passed close to the Ash Street Trailer Park. As they moved through the woods, they came upon a small brook that crossed their path. It was at this point that Andrew stumbled and dropped his toy into the undergrowth near the water. What had been an ordinary walk suddenly shifted in importance for the 4-year-old, who insisted on remaining behind to retrieve the item he had lost. His sister and cousin urged him to return home with them, but Andrew refused to leave the area without his toy. Following their decision to seek assistance, the 2 children walked back to inform nearby adults that Andrew had stayed behind. This choice, made in the context of routine childhood behavior, would mark the last confirmed interaction they had with him that day. When they returned to the wooded location accompanied by adults, Andrew was no longer there. The spot where he had been standing moments earlier was empty and silent. There were no visible signs of struggle, no immediate indication of where he might have gone, and no observable trail leading away from the brook. The surrounding area appeared unchanged, creating uncertainty about what had occurred in the brief interval of his absence. The sequence of events unfolded quickly and without warning, transforming a familiar setting into the starting point of a long and unresolved investigation. Andrew's disappearance from that specific location established the central facts of the case. A young child last seen alone in the woods, a clearly defined time frame, and a return to find him missing without trace. From that moment forward, the ordinary routine of a Saturday morning on Richard Avenue became irrevocably linked to the unresolved question of what happened in those defining minutes near the woodland trail. At the time he was last seen, Andrew remained positioned near the brook, separated from the others by a short distance. The adults who accompanied the children searched the immediate surroundings, but found no clear evidence explaining his disappearance. The recorded circumstances describe a brief window of time during which Andrew was left alone, after which his location could no longer be confirmed. Andrew Amato was described through documented records as a small 4-year-old boy whose physical appearance became central to identification efforts following his disappearance. He stood approximately 3 feet 6 inches tall and weighed about 38 pounds, measurements that reflected his slight build and young age at the time. His eyes were a clear blue, set against a fair white complexion that made his facial features easily recognizable to those familiar with him. Investigators noted several distinct markings that further defined his appearance. A noticeable 1-inch scar was located on the right side of his head at the hairline, providing a specific detail for verification in missing person reports. Behind his right ear, he also had a small mole, another characteristic carefully documented for reference during search operations. These features were consistently included in public descriptions distributed to assist officers and communities in recognizing him. Andrew's clothing on the day he was last seen was recorded with equal precision. He wore a maroon-colored snorkel jacket, a common style of outerwear at the time, featuring a hood and structured design. Beneath the jacket, he had on jeans and a white Mickey Mouse t-shirt, both items described clearly in official reports. On his feet were brown shoes, distinguished by a visible jogger stripe, a detail considered significant for identification purposes. Each element of Andrew's appearance served a practical function in the search process. Height, weight, and complexion provided a general profile, while the scar and mole offered more specific markers that could confirm recognition. Clothing details helped narrow observations and supported the accuracy of eyewitness reporting. Together, these characteristics formed the visual framework used by investigators and the public to identify Andrew in the hours and days following his disappearance. The precise documentation of his physical traits was essential to maintaining consistency in search efforts. By recording exact measurements and unique features, authorities ensured that any potential sightings could be evaluated against a defined set of criteria. This structured approach allowed search teams to rely on clear and verifiable information when assessing tips or reports from the public. These identifying characteristics remained a constant reference point throughout the initial stages of the investigation. The detailed description of Andrew as he was last seen provided an objective basis for recognition, reinforcing the importance of accurate visual records in cases involving missing children and unresolved circumstances. Throughout the distribution of information, law enforcement relied on the repetition of these physical identifiers to preserve accuracy and prevent confusion. Every reference to Andrew's description adhered to the same recorded details to maintain uniformity across reports, bulletins, and search coordination efforts. This consistency ensured that his appearance remained clearly defined, allowing investigators and the public to align observations precisely with documented characteristics and clothing descriptions. The careful preservation of this visual profile underscored its role as a critical tool during active search initiatives. After Andrew Amato was reported missing, an immediate response was initiated by local authorities in Webster, Massachusetts. Officers arrived at the scene and began organizing search operations within the surrounding wooded area where he was last seen. The urgency of the situation prompted the rapid involvement of additional resources, expanding the effort beyond the town's initial capabilities. Local law enforcement coordinated with state agencies to broaden the scope of the search. Teams were assembled to comb through the woods, carefully examining trails, undergrowth, and open clearings. Waterways and nearby ponds were systematically checked, as investigators worked methodically through each section of terrain. The objective was to account for every possible route or location where Andrew might have traveled or become unnoticed. Federal agencies were also brought into the operation, reinforcing the seriousness of the response. The combined presence of local, state, and federal officers created a coordinated framework designed to manage logistics, direct personnel, and document progress. This structured approach allowed search efforts to extend beyond Webster into surrounding regions, covering areas across Massachusetts and into neighboring Connecticut and Rhode Island. Hundreds of volunteers joined the official teams, reflecting widespread community involvement. Residents participated alongside trained personnel, forming organized groups that assisted in visual sweeps and area coverage. The presence of community members demonstrated a collective commitment to locating Andrew and supporting the investigative process. Flyers containing his description were distributed throughout communities, reinforcing awareness and encouraging public vigilance. Media coverage played an active role in disseminating information. Reports highlighted the search and shared identifying details to ensure broad visibility. This exposure contributed to increased public participation and reinforced the collaborative nature of the response. The consistent circulation of information supported efforts to maintain momentum and accuracy. Investigative procedures during the initial days and weeks remained focused on thorough area assessment and documentation. Search teams maintained structured communication, ensuring that each sector of the region was systematically reviewed. The scale of the operation reflected the gravity of the situation, with resources allocated to sustain continuous effort. Every stage of the response emphasized precision and coordination. Officers and volunteers worked within a clearly defined framework, adhering to directives that prioritize safety, efficiency, and comprehensive coverage. This meticulous approach reinforced the seriousness with which the disappearance was addressed. The expanded search across multiple states signified a recognition that the case required wide-ranging attention. By integrating operational planning, personnel deployment, and community cooperation, authorities ensured that the response remained active and far-reaching. The combined efforts illustrated a deliberate and organized pursuit aimed at locating Andrew through extensive and carefully managed procedures. Throughout this phase, documentation records were maintained to track progress and coordinate movement between teams. Scheduled briefings clarified assignments, and evaluated completed sectors. This ensured continuity and prevented duplication of effort. The sustained intensity of operations demonstrated a priority placed on resolution and procedural management throughout the active search period. Following Andrew Amato's disappearance, the investigation continued well beyond the initial search phase, developing into a prolonged effort that extended across decades. Law enforcement officials conducted nearly 100 interviews, engaging witnesses, family members, and individuals who might have possessed relevant information regarding the events surrounding his absence. Each conversation was formally recorded and reviewed as part of an expanding investigative record. As time progressed, numerous leads were pursued through methodical examination and procedural review. Investigators evaluated tips, cross-referenced statements, and analyzed potential patterns in an effort to establish verifiable connections. These efforts resulted in an increasingly comprehensive collection of reports, summaries, and documented observations. The case file grew steadily, reflecting the accumulation of theories and perspectives offered through official channels. Despite persistent activity, no conclusive evidence emerged to clarify Andrew's fate. Every line of inquiry was assessed within established investigative parameters, yet none produced definitive results. The absence of substantiated findings required authorities to continue the process with careful consideration and adherence to documented standards. Investigators remained committed to maintaining consistency and accuracy as they evaluated each new development. Over the years, the investigation was repeatedly reviewed to determine whether additional actionable information could be obtained. Law enforcement maintained detailed records outlining each interview, lead assessment, and analytical conclusion. This thorough documentation demonstrated a structured effort to preserve continuity and ensure that previous work remained accessible for future reference. Eventually, the case transitioned into classification as a cold case. This designation did not indicate abandonment or reduced responsibility, but rather reflected the reality that all viable leads had been exhausted. The investigative framework remained intact, but the absence of new evidence limited further progression. Throughout this period, officials emphasized that the unresolved status resulted from a lack of definitive information rather than procedural failure. Every available resource within the scope of the investigation had been utilized to pursue potential explanations. The growing file remained a testament to the diligence and methodical approach applied during each phase of the inquiry. The evolution of the investigation illustrates how sustained effort can persist even when conclusions remain unattainable. The extensive documentation, consistent review of witness statements, and ongoing analysis underscored a commitment to maintaining factual accuracy. As the case moved into long-term status, it continued to exist within a structured system designed to preserve information and support any future developments should new details eventually surface. Regular assessments ensured that existing materials were re-examined against updated procedural standards, strengthening the integrity of the preserved record. Investigators prioritize clarity in cataloging statements, ensuring that all documented information remained traceable and accessible. This careful organization allowed the case to remain structurally prepared for renewed evaluation if new data emerged. The continued maintenance of archived materials reinforced the investigative commitment, preserving comprehensive reference points and sustaining the foundational structure required for any future procedural action or renewed inquiry within established institutional investigative review procedures. Andrew Amato's disappearance had an emotional and practical impact on his immediate family, shaping their daily experience and long-term perspective in ways. Michelle Amato, his older sister, was one of the last people to see him before he vanished, and has described how that moment remained fixed in her memory. She has explained that the decision to leave him behind in the woods became a reference point that influenced how she understood responsibility, safety, and family connection throughout her life. Michelle has stated that the disappearance altered the way she approached adulthood, relationships, and parenting, as the absence of her brother created a persistent sense of unresolved uncertainty. She has described how the event affected her emotional framework, reinforcing constant awareness and protective instincts that extended into later years. Her reflections present a factual account of how a moment continued to shape perspectives and priorities over decades. The disappearance also imposed enduring strain on the family structure. Andrew's mother lived the remainder of her life without receiving reassurances or confirmed information regarding her son's fate. The uncertainty persisted through every major milestone, leaving an unfulfilled need for clarity that never resolved before her passing. This absence of closure represented a reality, reinforcing the impact of the unresolved case. Michelle has expressed concern for her father as time continues, noting the emotional and psychological weight he has carried since his son's disappearance. She has acknowledged his aging process and the unresolved grief associated with never knowing what happened. Her statements indicate a continued desire for him to receive answers before time removes that possibility entirely. The family's experience has remained defined by continuous uncertainty rather than finality. Without confirmed information, there has been no opportunity for formal resolution or restored peace. Each passing year has maintained the central absence that began with Andrew's disappearance, reinforcing an unbroken cycle of unanswered questions and endurance. Through Michelle's accounts and remarks, the long-term impact of the event is presented not as a sudden moment of grief, but as an ongoing presence influencing daily life. The family has continued to function within a reality shaped by loss without confirmation, balancing remembrance with the practical demands of life. The nature of this absence is evidenced by Michelle's emphasis on both emotional continuity and practical remembrance. Her reflections illustrate how the disappearance extended beyond the initial event, embedding itself into the family's narrative. This perspective highlights the persistent nature of unresolved loss and its influence on identity, behavior, and future outlook. The impact demonstrates that Andrew's disappearance did not conclude with the initial investigation. Instead, it established enduring consequences that continued to shape the family's emotional landscape, particularly through Michelle's experiences and her concern for her father's unresolved grief and advancing age. The family remains within a factual reality defined by continued uncertainty, reflecting the weight of the unresolved disappearance within their history, collective memory. Federal Bureau of Investigation leadership became prominent in the renewed efforts to address Andrew Amato's unresolved disappearance, signaling an intensified commitment to the long-standing case. Officials from the FBI's Boston field office assumed a central role, clearly stating their determination to continue pursuing information and evaluating all available material linked to the investigation. Their involvement reinforced the position that the case remained active and subject to ongoing review rather than relegated to historical status. Public statements from FBI representatives emphasized a focused approach rooted in responsibility and persistence. Officials communicated that the family deserved clarity and that the agency remained dedicated to identifying circumstances surrounding Andrew's disappearance. This messaging underscored a belief that unresolved cases required sustained attention and discipline, regardless of the passage of time. The tone of these statements reflected a continuation of investigative purpose rather than a symbolic gesture. A significant operational development occurred when the FBI conducted a search at Round Pond in Burrillville, Rhode Island. Divers and specialized personnel were deployed to the site as part of directed investigative action. The search was structured and controlled, demonstrating procedural intent and careful coordination. Although specific findings were not publicly disclosed, the operation illustrated definitive investigative movement connected directly to the case. The decision to carry out a search in this location signaled the application of renewed strategies within the investigative framework. It represented the integration of updated methods and sustained institutional focus. The presence of the FBI at Round Pond emphasized that the case continued to receive professional attention, supported by specialized resources and contemporary operational standards. Throughout renewed investigative efforts, officials maintained a consistent emphasis on determination and ongoing responsibility. Statements conveyed that the agency remained committed to pursuing all credible paths and reinforcing accountability. This approach reflected an understanding that unresolved cases continue to require structured oversight and evaluation. The FBI's involvement demonstrated a broader message regarding modern investigative persistence. By maintaining leadership over a long-standing case, the agency illustrated that time does not diminish institutional commitment or procedural resolve. The continuity of effort reaffirmed that renewed attention can support clarity even when progress appears limited. This phase of the investigation highlighted the enduring significance of methodical dedication within the criminal justice process. Officials articulated that sustained engagement remains critical in unresolved cases, reinforcing the principle that investigative responsibility continues until verified conclusions are established. The documented actions and stated determination contributed to a formal understanding that Andrew Amato's case remains subject to active pursuit. The FBI's leadership role strengthened the framework of renewed investigation, underscoring that accountability and resolution remain definitive objectives. The continued review of available material and targeted search initiatives reflected a structured commitment to preserving investigative integrity through disciplined procedural action and sustained institutional focus within ongoing unresolved case management practices. This sustained leadership reinforced confidence in procedural continuity while maintaining disciplined attention to unresolved investigative priorities and standards. Law enforcement officials formally announced a reward for information connected to Andrew Amato's disappearance, reinforcing their position that the case remains solvable through continued public cooperation. The announcement clarified that the reward was intended to motivate individuals with relevant knowledge to come forward and assist investigators in identifying responsible parties. Authorities emphasized that even long-standing silence could be broken through renewed communication, encouraging anyone holding information to participate responsibly. Officials explained that the reward structure was designed to support transparency and accountability, strengthening the connection between investigative agencies and the public. The stated objective was to increase awareness while reinforcing the seriousness of the ongoing inquiry. By introducing financial incentive alongside procedural appeal, law enforcement underscored confidence in achieving resolution through collective assistance. The announcement also reaffirmed dedication to maintaining investigative momentum. Statements reiterated the belief that meaningful contributions from the community could provide decisive progress. This approach demonstrated that continued engagement and structured support remain central to resolving unresolved cases. By outlining the reward and its purpose, officials reinforced the message that cooperation is necessary and resolution remains achievable. Andrew Amato's disappearance has been examined through several theories formally discussed by investigators, all grounded in law enforcement assessment rather than unsupported speculation. Among these perspectives, the possibility of abduction has been identified as a primary consideration guiding continued evaluation of the case. Officials have indicated that the circumstances surrounding his sudden absence from the wooded area suggest factors inconsistent with simple wandering or accidental disorientation. Investigators have acknowledged that the rapid disappearance and absence of observable trace raise concern that Andrew may have been taken by an unknown individual. This perspective remains aligned with procedural reasoning and continues to influence structured, investigative direction. The theory does not assign motive or identity, but reflects a measured interpretation of available information. Law enforcement has also considered the environment where Andrew was last seen, noting access points and proximity to roadways as factors contributing to investigative perspective. These elements have been reviewed in the context of potential external involvement, reinforcing the relevance of abduction as a formal investigative focus. Authorities have consistently avoided speculative conclusions, instead maintaining disciplined evaluation guided by verified parameters. The emphasis on abduction has shaped subsequent decisions, including renewed attention and targeted operations. Officials have clarified that this approach does not exclude other possibilities, but represents the most consistent interpretation supported by procedural analysis. The evaluation process remains deliberate and controlled, ensuring that each theory is framed within verified investigative standards. Throughout the case, law enforcement has reiterated that all theories are assessed through documented information and institutional review. The guiding framework prioritizes accountability, precision, and adherence to established investigative practice. This method ensures that the focus remains grounded in evidence recognition rather than conjecture. By sustaining attention on the abduction theory, authorities underscore that unresolved cases require focused and persistent analysis. The continued development of investigative strategies reflects commitment to factual interpretation and responsible case management. This perspective supports the broader understanding that addressing unresolved disappearances requires both flexibility and restraint. While possibilities are acknowledged, each is treated with caution and formal review. The emphasis on abduction serves as a structured point of reference guiding the direction of ongoing efforts, reinforcing law enforcement's dedication to integrity, procedural consistency, and clarity in investigative practice. Officials continue to reaffirm that the discussion of theories remains firmly within documented law enforcement perspective and does not imply assumptions beyond verified case direction. The sustained reference to abduction reflects procedural caution and structured focus, not predetermined conclusion. Each assessment is subject to regular review, ensuring alignment with current investigative priorities and standards. By maintaining disciplined language and controlled framing, investigators preserve the integrity of the ongoing process. This controlled approach demonstrates responsible oversight and reinforces that continued evaluation remains necessary until factual resolution is achieved. Through careful articulation and consistent reasoning, authorities maintain a clear investigative narrative that prioritizes accuracy, transparency, and persistent commitment to structured case advancement across evolving procedural expectations. Andrew Amato disappeared 47 years ago, and the passage of time has fundamentally shaped how his case is remembered within public consciousness and family history. Over decades, his disappearance has remained a fixed reference point, influencing community recollection and sustaining awareness long after initial search efforts concluded. The continued absence of resolution has defined the family's enduring wait for answers, reinforcing a prolonged experience of uncertainty without confirmed closure. Through the years, public memory has preserved the circumstances of his disappearance, maintaining recognition of the location, timeline, and unresolved nature of the case. This sustained awareness illustrates how cases involving missing children remain embedded within collective consciousness across generations. The family continues to exist within a defined state of unanswered expectation, where each passing year reinforces the absence of verified conclusions. Statements have consistently reflected the impact of prolonged uncertainty, illustrating how unresolved disappearance becomes a lasting influence on daily life and personal perspective. As time progressed, societal understanding of child safety evolved, shaping new standards, awareness, and protective measures within communities. The disappearance contributed to broader recognition that structured vigilance and increased preventive attention are critical in safeguarding children. Over the 47-year span, shifts in public practice reinforce the importance of defined supervision and organized community awareness in response to historical cases. This gradual transformation in awareness demonstrates how cumulative experience shapes collective standards and procedural consciousness regarding child protection. Despite these societal developments, the unresolved condition of Andrew's case continues to represent an enduring absence rather than a resolved conclusion. The extended duration has influenced how the public contextualizes the disappearance, embedding it within a broader framework of long-term unresolved cases. Families experiencing similar circumstances often reflect similar patterns of remembrance, expectation, and ongoing emotional adjustment. In Andrew's case, the passage of decades has reinforced the enduring presence of unanswered questions within personal and public narrative. The absence of definitive answers continues to shape the family's perspective while preserving the historical importance of the case in public records. This sustained period of uncertainty illustrates the long-lasting effects unresolved disappearance imposes on both memory and institutional awareness. Public recognition has remained aligned with the central fact that Andrew's fate remains unconfirmed. Across 47 years, the case has sustained attention through its unresolved status and continued relevance. This continuity reinforces how collective memory preserves unresolved cases as markers of enduring uncertainty and procedural significance. The family's ongoing narrative remains shaped by waiting rather than conclusion, maintaining acknowledgement of absence over resolution. This persistent condition reflects the lasting imprint of disappearance on memory, awareness, and evolving societal understanding. Through continued reference, the case demonstrates how time reinforces unresolved status while sustaining structured attention within official and community memory systems and procedural continuity. These developments illustrate the enduring relationship between prolonged uncertainty, public remembrance, and evolving awareness surrounding child safety and unresolved disappearance across historical context. Andrew Amato remains officially classified as missing, and his case continues to be listed as unresolved within active investigative records. Law enforcement agencies have maintained formal appeals requesting public assistance, emphasizing that the investigation remains ongoing and supported by continued procedural oversight. Officials reaffirm that the disappearance has not been closed and that all credible information is still subject to review and evaluation. Authorities continue to encourage individuals with relevant knowledge to come forward, stressing that cooperation remains essential to advancing the case. These appeals reinforce that the investigation has not reached final resolution and continues under structured management. The status of the inquiry reflects consistent documentation, sustained review, and institutional commitment to preserving accountability. The current standing of the case demonstrates that investigative responsibility remains active, not historical. Every appeal issued emphasizes that unresolved status does not limit pursuit. Law enforcement reiterates that clarity remains the objective, and efforts continue without formal conclusion. The ongoing nature of the investigation reflects a sustained commitment to locating Andrew and addressing the unanswered circumstances surrounding his disappearance. The absence of confirmed findings reinforces continued procedure rather than final determination. Officials maintain that the case remains open for examination, reinforcing both procedural continuity and renewed focus. The family continues to exist within a reality of unanswered questions, while authorities persist in promoting assistance through formal channels. This persistent outreach reflects an enduring goal to provide clarity where uncertainty remains. The emphasis remains on structured dedication to bringing Andrew home and achieving meaningful closure for his family. The final position presented by officials underscores that the case is unresolved and active. Investigators affirm that their efforts remain consistent, of methodical progression, and purposefully directed. Through ongoing communication and procedural review, the case retains significance within investigative priorities. By reinforcing appeals for cooperation, authorities sustain engagement and maintain transparency regarding case status. The commitment to addressing this unresolved disappearance continues through systematic oversight and continued public engagement. This conclusion affirms the ongoing intention to bring Andrew Amato home while providing justified closure, grounded solely in verified process. Closure remains a central objective, reinforcing the foundational requirement for accurate resolution and sustained investigative accountability systems. This sustained status reflects the disciplined continuation of investigative focus, where procedural responsibility aligns with continued outreach, documentation, and structured evaluation, ensuring the inquiry remains positioned for responsible development and formal assessment in accordance with established standards and defined operational guidelines maintained by investigative authorities tasked with preserving clarity and resolution objectives across ongoing case management. Through this maintained framework, the case continues to exist within a defined investigative space, emphasizing continued diligence, coordinated review, and institutional readiness, while reinforcing the objective of eventual closure and consistent factual accountability within preserved procedural structures and verified organizational responsibility. These actions collectively confirm that renewed determination remains central to delivering justified answers and structured closure consistent with established investigative process integrity standards upheld.